because it's been here for coming on 70 years now. This building was constructed in 1930, or more than 70 years, I beg your pardon. And generations of Buddhists have sat where you're sitting now. In the early days, it was in folding chairs. The pews are a more recent addition. And as someone who sat in both, I kind of like the pews. They're a little more comfortable. But the spirit that they had still continues. So I'd just like to enjoy that for a moment before we start getting into some of the content of today's session. I'm going to ask you to join me in putting your hands together as we say in Gasho. Please everyone, in Gasho. And as an event here at the Buddhist Temple of San Diego, we begin with an invocation or a recitation that calls the name of Amida Buddha out of respect to the place that we're in and for the many members of our temple. It's an important thing. So in call and response form, please join me if you would like in reciting one of Buddha's many names. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namada Samada. So we are slowly waiting for the air conditioning to catch up, but it's certainly a lot cooler now in this room than it was first thing this morning. We hope that you'll be comfortable today. I'd like to go ahead and ask you to just enjoy this space for a moment or two in quiet. We're not going to talk about it being a meditation with a capital M, but make yourself comfortable and relaxed and be conscious a little bit of how free your abdomen is to be able to breathe. So you don't want to be slumped over. You want to be somewhat upright. And we're going to go ahead and have our eyes semi-closed. We're not going to put our hands in any particular hand position. But please, excuse me, go ahead and exhale. And then let's try that again. Just normal breath. Exhale. Physiologically, that helps us relax. So you know that already probably, but it's a good tool to have in your toolkit if you need a moment or two to relax. So that's what we're going to do. And now, to make it even deeper a little bit, I want you to go ahead and take a really deep breath. And exhale. So the best way to make sure that you're always getting as much fresh air as possible is to exhale completely. Mostly, during normal breathing, our lungs are a mixing chamber. We exhale about half of the carbon dioxide and take in fresher air with more oxygen. It mixes, and that's what our lungs enjoy. In yogic breathing, we exhale completely, and then when we inhale, all fresh air. So that slows things down too, which is nice for your blood pressure and comfort. So let's just spend a few minutes, just eyes slightly closed, looking down in front of you. Exhale completely. And then nice slow inhale. And on your own rhythm, continue. Just be conscious of the breath. Just be conscious of the relaxation that's a physiologically triggered response. and then try and make sure that you don't start to settle down. You still want that elevation so that your full lung capacity and the use of your abdomen are available to you. Couple more breaths. Last exhalation, and relax. So thank you for that. A lot of people come to a Buddhist temple hoping to find peace. That may have been it. So we'll just go ahead. The peace is something that is available to us. It's not given to you by anybody else. But if you keep this in your toolkit, you may be able to find a spot or a place where if you're especially upset, you can use your breath to help you. So most of you know me. My name is Bill Teague. I'm one of the certified minister's assistants here at the Buddhist Temple of San Diego. And I overheard in the chit-chat before the session, some of you know that this coming Saturday, there will be a tri-temple seminar starting at 9 a.m. And we have flyers for you in the lobby, in the foyer to this hall with more details. But it focuses on the program of minister's assistants. And it's been a decades-long effort by our national organization to make more people available who can help share the Dharma. It's a fascinating program, and it's had the benefit of helping us deal with a ministerial shortage. So there are more temples in our national organization than there are ordained ministers. So the creation of a role like mine is helpful. It had a secondary benefit because many of the people who became certified minister's assistants, I'm not speaking for myself, but for many of my fine colleagues here in San Diego, are continuing with their studies. We already have four ordained reverends here at the temple, except for our resident minister, Reverend Sterling Davenport. We're all volunteers. But even so, that means that we can conduct more services, more memorial services, better support for our membership and our visitors with so many folks as part of the ministerial staff. Our ordained ministers include, besides Reverend Davenport, who came to us from Vista Buddhist Temple, we have Reverend Sharon Sasaki, Reverend Noriko Kawai, and Reverend, I'm suddenly going up and this is a senior moment, Reverend Smitty, thank you so much. Reverend Smitty was our first ordained minister to come out of that ministerial assistant program. It's a complicated program. It requires a lot of academic work. It more follows the Western model of seminary than it does some of the more traditional Buddhistic ethnic traditions where you may become an ordained minister because the master of the temple you're with chooses you and gives you a Dharma seal, meaning that you are now able to go ahead and share the Dharma. They're both great systems. They both have their pros and cons, but the existence of the Minister's Assistant Program is really important to us, which is why we encourage all of you to come this Saturday at 9 a.m. Registration is free. We ask you to register by August 28th, but if you would like to have a bento afterwards, a lunch afterwards, today is the last day to order that, and there's information both on our website and in the handout on how to do that. It's $25 for the bento, and many people use PayPal. There's other ways to pay as well. So there'll be more announcements at the end of this. But today we have an interesting and difficult topic, but it's at the core of historical Buddhism, and that's suffering. The Buddha famously said at one point, and just parenthetically, it was not the Buddha's goal to start a new religion or get a lot of followers or disciples. It was his goal to help people with suffering. The Buddha said, my goal is to teach people why they suffer and to provide ways to help them stop suffering. And in earlier sessions, we identified some of the causes of that suffering. Certainly the indignities, the difficulties that we all face that are common to everyone. We get sick, illness. We get old. And fortunately in the United States, we're getting more and more long-lived. My wife and I enjoyed a lovely birthday party for our friend Lucille Chang, who just turned 100. Very cogent and sharp and with it. But old age is not always an easy go for many people. And of course, death, those are really heavy things to deal with and are one cause of suffering. Our former resident minister, Reverend Kenji Akahoshi, some of you know him, had an interesting way of talking about suffering that we can use to further understand the traditional understanding. If you read a book about Buddhism, they will say something along these lines that the Buddha said we suffer because of our passions or our attachments. And that's, I guess that's okay, and it's probably accurate, but I think that what Kenji Sensei came up with was even more helpful, and he said that we suffer because things don't go the way we want. Now you can translate that to the other things that have been said. That is, we're attached to a vision of the world where justice prevails, where we are granted automatic respect, where people recognize our worth as a living human being. And if that gets thwarted, that causes suffering. So we're going to delve down into aspects of suffering as identified in Buddhism, and then talk a little bit among ourselves about how we experience suffering. Because the real reason for the Buddha's teachings is you. He didn't know you personally, but he knew that you were a human being, and that as human beings we tend to suffer. So he explored that to a large degree. The quotation I gave you earlier of the Buddha saying that my teaching is about suffering and how to cease that suffering is sometimes, maybe for emphasis, misquoted. They'll say, my only teaching. Most of you know the Buddha taught a large number of things, but central and core is the problem, the difficulty of suffering. A few terms you'll hear when you go to a Buddhist temple about suffering is you might hear reference to the world of samsara. We inherit Sanskrit and Pali terms because those were part of the languages of India and Nepal from which the Buddha came. Samsara means the endless cycle of birth and death. So that may sound to you like we're telling you to believe in reincarnation. Maybe you want to believe in reincarnation, or maybe it doesn't make sense to you. The real issue is that none of us really knows what happens when we die. If you're listening to someone who is talking about death, another minister, another person certified to share the Dharma, they may say, they may admit that we don't really know. Shinran Shonin at one point, the founder of our sect, at one point admitted that he didn't really know. It's a great mystery to us. We don't know what's on the other side. But there are traditions of understanding it, concepts that help us understand it. And one of them, at the time, was reincarnation. But we can also understand the cycle of birth and death. I suggested this last week, that reincarnation is probably better understood for us as human beings living our busy lives as not being lifetime to lifetime, but from day to day. When you wake up in the morning, you're kind of the same person, but it's a new day. You're slightly different. And at a biological level, some of your cells have already been replaced. So it sort of works as a metaphor for what happens from day to day. Moreover, some of the teachings that the Buddha has about suffering have us focus on our actions today with the knowledge that they affect us tomorrow. And that's much easier to conceptualize and certainly much easier to make happen in everyday life on a day-to-day basis and not a lifetime-to-lifetime basis. When the Buddha was teaching, a very common social structure was the caste system, in which everyone was at a certain caste with certain rights and responsibilities. At the bottom were the so-called untouchables, and at the top were the so-called Brahmins, the wise leaders and rulers. And it was a self-fulfilling system in that the thought was, well, these people have their positions because they had good karma or bad karma. That is, that if I wake up and I'm in the untouchable caste and have only horrible jobs to do that don't pay well, barely make a living, and get shunned by much of society, that's because of my bad karma, that I lived a bad life earlier. So if that's the case, then I can be justified in snubbing you. I can look down my nose at you. You obviously failed, you know. You weren't a good enough person. So you deserve what you've got. And the ruling class can also determine in that system that, well, I'm enjoying this position because I am so virtuous, not just now, but in previous lives. I did so many good deeds. I acquired so much merit. And the Buddha rejected that system entirely. That's one reason why I think there is a kind of American appreciation for Buddhism. We really don't like hierarchies. The goal of democracy is that we're all on the same level. Because of that equanimity, from the Buddhist perspective, from the perspective of the enlightened person, he said that nobility does not come from your parents. Nobility comes from how you behave, how you act. So there is the Buddhist emphasis on ethics, which coincidentally can help us with a future life. That is, it can help us tomorrow. If we do well, if we do good, if we avoid hurting people, creating problems today, it makes life easier tomorrow. And that's in real time, that's in the real world. It's not just a concept or a theory. So last week we established that the word that was being used for suffering in much of the Buddha's teachings was the Sanskrit word dukkha, which is a very broad word. It means everything from discomfort, dissatisfaction, to true deep suffering. And we also identified it that it was a figure of speech. It means the wheel doesn't fit the axle. So on the dissatisfaction side, the irritating side, you could see that if you're in a wooden cart and the wheel doesn't fit the axle, it's going to keep bumping. This led one commentator, Reverend Ken Tanaka, to identify what the Buddha said about suffering is to say life is a bumpy road. In that phrase, he identifies the figure of speech, and he avoids sort of over stressing the word suffering, because obviously no religion is helpful if it stresses suffering too much. And yet suffering is an important part of the early teachings of the Buddha. I'll just reiterate that dukkha, or suffering in that broad sense, is one of the first marks of existence that the Buddha identified, and it's also the first noble truth. So in the American grain, we like things positive, and it is a little difficult sometimes to deal with a religion that might seem like it's being unnecessarily negative. I'm going to go ahead and read for you the Four Noble Truths, and the noble in this case is thrown in. It's not because the Buddha had been a former nobleman, or at least some kind of aristocrat in a kind of republic, Kapilavastu, but because it's the way in which an enlightened person sees reality. That's the noble part of it. So here are the Four Noble Truths, and I'll follow them up with what might be an American translation. Life is suffering, or dukkha. The translation, let's all be happy. 2, we suffer because of our attachments or passions. American, you can be happier by cheerfully managing your problems and attachments. 3, there is a way to rise above our suffering. American, I can show you how. And 4, that way is the Eightfold Noble Path. The American, let's get spiritual. So I know that sounds a little bit like an infomercial, but if a marketing person were to get a hold of the Four Noble Truths, it would probably take that form. There's another term that you might hear. I'll just mention it. And instead of saying this world of samsara, sometimes you might hear, it's always done with the adjective in front of world in this case, saha, this saha world. That's a Sanskrit term that is more common in Mahayana schools and sects. This being a Japanese Buddhist temple, in the Mahayana branch, if you were to come to another service, you might actually hear someone use that term, this saha world. But the idea is the same. It's feeling caught in an endless cycle without possibility of escape, a very discouraging, depressing thought. We've talked a little bit about reincarnation in previous lives, and that was part of a major concept that the Buddha inherited some 2,500 plus years ago. And he used it because that's how people thought. But as far as the Buddha himself, his goal was not to help you eventually improve your karma so that you could achieve a better life by degrees. He wanted people to go ahead and break that cycle in a single lifetime. So that's another reason why it's better for us to think about reincarnation as something happening from day to day. We want to have the benefit of the teachings in this life. So I may have mentioned the parable of Kisa Gotami last time, but it is one of the first things that the Buddhist teachings turn to when talking about suffering. And the story is that Kisa Gotami was a woman whose son had died young, as not an infant, but a very young boy. And she was so distraught that she could not accept that. And she actually went from person to person, teacher to teacher, guru to guru, trying to find someone who could revive her son, bring my son back, help him live again. And at one point, one of the wise ones that she went to said, well, I don't know how to do this, but if anyone could, maybe it's the Buddha. And Kisa Gotami happened to be close enough, so she was able to go ahead and visit the Buddha. The Buddha received her, he listened to her story carefully, and he thought. Eventually he said, I may be able to bring your son back to life, but I need you to bring me a handful of mustard seeds from a house in this village that has not been touched by death. So Kisa Gotami was overjoyed. She did go from house to house. Again, this is a little gruesome, but she actually took her son with her, but was told at each house that no, in this house we lost a grandparent. No, in this house we lost a brother. No, in this house we lost a child too. And eventually Kisa Gotami realized the universality of death, that we're all subject to that. So she came back to the Buddha and confirmed her understanding, and eventually was reconciled to her son's death. How the story continues is that Kisa Gotami did go to the forest and provide her son with a formal burial. And she did return to the Buddha and chose to become a monastic, a nun, as one of his disciples, and was accepted by the Buddha. There's another parable some of you have heard, again from the direct teachings of the Buddha, which is about an arrow. And the story is that a group of friends was going through the forest when one of them was suddenly struck by an arrow, not killing the victim, but extremely painful. But the friends around him were horrified. They couldn't believe it, and they chattered on about immaterial things, perhaps. Who could have done this? Where was the assailant? Now, was the arrow poisoned, and if so, by which kind of poison? What wood is the arrow made of? What bird was used to fletch the feathers on the arrow? In the meanwhile, the man who had received the blow from the arrow still in him, was suffering tremendously. So the Buddha further commented that in some ways the man suffered two arrows. The first arrow he had no control over. He was chosen for whatever reason. Maybe even the person with the bow and arrow wasn't trying to shoot him directly. But the second arrow was the discussion of things that were of lesser importance while the person went ahead and suffered. So the parable of the arrow teaches us that when we experience suffering, and very often it's an external event we have no control over, we need to identify it and recognize it as such, and then act accordingly. Not to go ahead and worry it over, invest a lot of emotion about things without dealing with the problem. It's hard, but it can be done. People can do that. Now there are times And I'm not saying this is true of everybody, but there are times where our suffering is caused by ourselves. So in that case, what does that mean? Our opportunity when we recognize the suffering is to go ahead and take a closer look at who we are and how that event happened. And then we may be better prepared to attempt to reconcile. You may have friends who are in families where siblings don't talk to each other, or parents and children don't talk to each other. Tragic. So if something happened, somebody was wronged, no one forgave. But a more Buddhist approach is to go ahead and accept what you have done, identify the suffering, and then see what might be done. In a family setting, that might be to go ahead and review your own behavior. See how you might have turned people in the family against you, and to see if there's a way to mitigate that. There may be. We have fine brains, and we are able to go ahead and come up with better ways to behave. This gives me a chance to talk about one numbered list I didn't get to last week, which are the 3 poisons. Most of you know them: greed, anger, and ignorance. If you have experienced a situation where you've suffered because of your own actions, if you look back at how that came to be, you're going to find one of those 3 poisons there: greed, anger, or ignorance. One of the ministers in BCA came up with a slightly different 3rd item. Instead of instead of ignorance, he said stupidity, and that allowed him to use the acronym GAS. So he started in his sermons: do you have gas? Greed, anger, and stupidity. It may be easier to remember that way. But we are all frail humans. We're not better than other people necessarily, or they better than us. So if we can recognize the greed, anger, or ignorance in ourselves, we may be better able to understand the greed, anger, or ignorance of another person. And that does allow operating room for you to see if there's a way to improve the situation, either directly with the wronged individuals or the individuals who hold you responsible for something, or just in a more general way. If you have been selfish, greedy in the past, maybe you can counteract that by identifying more ways that you can be more generous, less stingy, more helpful to other people. Excuse me. Our opportunities are always there. There are a few questionable concepts in Buddhism I'd like to identify for a second. Excuse me. And you may have heard this before, that suffering is unavoidable. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. And that sounds good in a way, but in some ways I think that the Buddha's parable of the arrow had it better. It's not that suffering is optional, but the second arrow of suffering is optional. We can avoid that one. If you're not careful, that way of thinking tends to blame the victim. I could say, well, it's your fault that you're suffering. And that's hardly a Buddhistic response in my view. A Buddhistic response is to hear the other person and commiserate. Help them understand, help them deal with the pain that they're going through. And if you can, you may be able to make other small suggestions. But we don't want to go ahead and blame the victim by saying, well, it's up to you whether you suffer or not. Life is difficult. Life does include suffering or lesser forms of discomfort, but at least in Buddhism, we have approaches and tools to deal with them. The Buddha's parable about a first and second arrow, I think, presents a fairer way of looking at suffering. And I think it's a good thing to keep in mind if you find yourself dealing with that kind of situation. And to return to the parable of Kisa Gotami, I think that the parable implies that she made two advances, not just in accommodating herself or gaining the wisdom that we are all dealing with the universality of death, but also she became more compassionate. That is, that she came back to the community. She became a disciple of Shakyamuni Buddha as a monastic and dedicated her life to helping others. So if you're looking for a Buddhistic way of dealing with suffering, it has to do with transforming pain to wisdom and compassion. I don't want to be glib about that because suffering is real and very difficult. But I do argue that it's a mistake to think, as you might sometimes believe if you read some descriptions of the Buddha or Buddhism, that the Buddha was above suffering. The Buddha was always sitting quietly with a little smile on his face. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese priest and scholar who passed away in the last 20 years, wrote in his book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings, that the Buddha suffers like you and me. The enlightened Buddha suffers like you and me, even more so, because he was compassionate. He felt our pain. You may know the street language, of course, where somebody might tell the other, I feel you, or to make sure that the person's being understood by the other, they would say, you feel me? That's compassion. And the Buddha felt others' pain as well. In his example, though, we're asked to believe that he was able to transform them into wisdom and compassion. I talked about Kisa Gotami's difficulty, and in a real way, just to revisit that for a second, the reason why she could become more compassionate to others about death is because she had experienced it herself. So it's your experience that really makes the difference. And what you do with that experience. You could make it an endless cycle where you're upset or despairing, you don't know what to do, or you can look at it and accept it and then find things you can do to relieve some of your own anxiety. In Kisa Gotami's case, it was to become a nun and to serve the community. In a moment, we're going to do a little activity among ourselves in which some of these concepts will be brought home. But I just wanted to catch up and reiterate the human condition, and that is that we're all beset by the three poisons. You may not have heard this before, but there is a tradition in Buddhism that only humans can become Buddhas. And that's not meant to elevate the humans. It's meant to remind us that only humans need to become Buddhas. Cats and dogs, they enjoy their Buddha nature. They don't need an enlightenment experience. A cat is a cat. A dog is a dog. But humans are kettles of fish. We're complicated. We're changing all the time. So therefore, the tradition is that only humans can become Buddhas. Again, it's not a matter of pride. It's because we need it. I'm sparing you some things. So at this time, I'd like to share with you the Metta Sutta, or the Sutra of Loving Kindness. We're not going to go ahead and pick up a book and read from it. I think we can all do it because it's very formulaic. I'm going to sing the first verse to you, call and response. So we'll do all 4 lines, and then you'll understand the structure, and then I'll just go ahead and give you the cue. So the first verse has to do with all sentient beings, and the second verse talks about you. And then you'll see the progression from beyond ourselves in this recitation. So again, please bear with me. Don't look at a book. We just want to use our brains and our listening. So, but do put your hands together in Gasho. So call and response. May all beings be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. So only 3 lines. Okay, now it's going to be I. May I, and just join me. May I be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to me. May I live in peace and harmony. And now my family. May my family be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. And now, my friends. May my friends be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. May my teachers. May my teachers be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. Strangers. May strangers be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. My enemies. May my enemies be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. May all beings. May all beings be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. May they live in peace and harmony. And again, those who wish may join me in reciting the name of Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namada. So please relax. So if you hadn't experienced that before, it's shocking to hear us say that we want our enemies to be happy and well. But that's embedded in the first verse. May all sentient beings be happy and well. May no harm or difficulty come to them. That includes our enemies too. That's how tough Buddhism is to live completely. We're being asked to recognize our enemies as frail human beings just like us, beset by the three poisons. And it asks us to identify at least the potential that people do change. That someone who has behaved to us in a horrible way may have done so for reasons we don't understand, but they are not necessarily a horrible person. This is not a Pollyannish view. Obviously, there are some sociopaths, psychopaths who are just horrible people out and out, but a very small percentage. Most of us are under stress that may not be appreciated by other people, and sometimes we're short with other people if it's just a small upset. In Buddhism, we're asked to see our enemies, and I'm glad everyone is sitting down for this, but to see our enemies as teachers. Because they force us to face head on things that have happened to us that have been very unpleasant. And to be able to find in that mindfulness and meditation about an event that happened the possibility that the other person was beset by the three poisons just like we are sometimes. Most of us do pretty well. Most of us aren't abnormally greedy, abnormally passionate, abnormally stingy, abnormally stupid, and yet we all do things sometimes that are greedy, sometimes things that are angry, sometimes things that are ignorant. And we have to allow for the possibility that that's what might be happening with our enemies. It doesn't mean that you have to love your enemy as yourself by knocking on their door and embracing them, etc. It does mean that to start your own healing, you need to at least entertain that possibility. So that's one of the greatest sutras, I think, from the early days of Buddhism. There are many sutras, of course, but they're often very technical, aimed at monastics, but this one speaks to all of us. So we're going to go ahead and have more discussion and take questions, but as a kind of formal close, I just hope you take away from today that we can't escape suffering. That's not the goal. But we can transform it when it becomes the condition that helps us grow in wisdom and compassion. In transforming it, in that way we transcend suffering, and we do leave suffering behind. So at this point, I'm happy to take any thoughts or comments people had about this presentation on suffering, or take any questions you might have. Roger? Roger was commenting that the Metta Sutra was chanted by every Buddhist group he's ever visited. It's tremendously powerful. Katie? Many of the traditions, Katie's comment was just that it's sometimes very melodic. It's presented with the melody I gave you in our tradition, but it's not the only tune. Other thoughts or comments? Katie. Yeah, that's might be seen as an extreme presentation, but the brochure that we used to have by a Japanese minister translated into English, Katie was telling us, took that very same point that our enemies are our teachers, and that we could even consider Hitler a bodhisattva, um, because it forced us to look at things that we would not have looked at otherwise. And it's a lovely thought. It reminds me of John Stewart, who once had in one of his essays, had a mock interview with Hitler, who, when asked about all the horrible things he did, this is, complete fantasy where Hitler survives World War II. But Hitler was saying, "Well, I was pretty angry back then," just yeah. Um, there is tremendous difficulty in the world. In all seriousness, the pogrom, the identification of groups of people, Jews but others, who didn't deserve to live. It's chilling. It's horrible. So we sometimes are faced with really difficult topics like that. And it's because of those things, that for better or for worse, that wars are sometimes fought. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. No, it's even more powerful that way. Um, Arturo, who is one of my colleagues as a certified minister's assistant, was identifying the fact that that parable came after the Buddha was asked a number of questions that had to do with is there a creator, how is the universe created, what happens after you die, is there a God? And the Buddha then identified that the more immediate answer has to do with how we live our lives right now. So the parable then was to show a situation where people were spending too much time on other topics. In the sutras, it's often said that when the Buddha was asked one of those questions, he may not even have answered them. That the Buddha maintained a noble silence because he just didn't want to waste the time. You and I can argue about the nature of God. You and I can make cases for our view of our place in the universe, but the Buddha was looking for practical solutions wherever. Very often, he would always bring things back down to what was in our control. So that's very encouraging. Well, Roger, you had a comment. Well, that's great. So Roger, I can probably recall enough of your second comment, but that's that there is a sutra that Roger noted in which the Buddha is asked such questions, that is, that are, the big questions, if you will, and the Buddha says, that's not what I teach. And the sutra includes a list of the things even that the Buddha does not teach, and Roger was very impressed that would be such a list, that there would be a religion that says, no, I don't know, or, I'm not going to go there. And Roger also made the point that in various translations, as the sutras traveled from Indic sources to Chinese translations through Korea, finally to Japan, by the time that same sutra came to Japan, the list of things that the Buddha did not teach, the one that we use in our tradition, is the longest. So that inspired or helped Roger become more interested in Buddhism. So thanks for that. I'll go ahead and we can talk further informally, but we should be ending fairly soon. And I did want to give a chance for announcements. Arturo, you may have something.
No, I'm
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you're welcome to offer incense before you go. Arturo, if you could do both the one that's up there and then the central, that would be awesome. There are some things coming up. That is, we have one more session on a Sunday offered by Reverend Sterling Davenport, in which he will provide expertise on how we apply some of these teachings in our daily lives, and talk a little bit more about Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, not just the enlightened beings, but the people who have come close to being enlightened, who are almost enlightened in life. And there is also, at the beginning I did mention, the Saturday seminar at 9 a.m. There's handouts in the back on that. Roger, you had an announcement?
Again,
Get on the mic.
get on the mic. Am I on the mic?
Yes.
There is going to be a twilight vigil by the Interfaith Coalition in downtown San Diego at the courthouse this Wednesday from 6 to 7. I have flyers with the details for anyone who wants it. I'll put them out front there. Arturo, I've gone to these things for ages, and I overhear people speaking in Spanish, and in fact carrying signs in Spanish. This would be a place, if you showed up in your Spanish climate t-shirt, that it might expand our Sangha with some Spanish-speaking members. So I will put this in the back.
Laureen, I think you had an announcement.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lorene Ota. I'm just making a little request. Let's see. John McAlpine, who's been a member of the temple for some years, is looking for a temporary place to rent. There was one apartment in his building that caught fire, and so they're having to vacate everybody in the building. And so if you know of like a studio or an ADU or other dwelling place he can rent temporarily, please contact him. His number is 619-301-3028, or you could maybe leave a message at the secretary's desk. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Laureen. Yes, so it's always fine to go ahead and just send an email or call the temple. And Linda Redenbaugh, our admin, we'll go ahead and make sure that John gets the information. So at this time, I had two more announcements. I'm so sorry. One is that many folks are going to be helping to move furniture so that they can do all the carpets in here. If you go downstairs to the dining area, I think we have some refreshments for you. I know that Laureen made a nice cake for us. And you may also find folks who are organizing the furniture moving. So a little bit of chaos, but if you could help, we'd much appreciate that. So I wanted to thank you all for attending. I hope you got something out of this, and hope to see you next Sunday as well. Thank you, everyone. Please join me one last time. Hands together in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namadab, Namadab, Namadab. Thank you, and you're welcome to offer incense before you go if you'd like. Take care.